Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome to It Has Nothing to Do with Age or Gender. Unfortunately, my co-host, Tony Brickle, is not here today, and we'll look for him next week. And it's my pleasure. I have two wonderful guests today, and on my left is
Mark Falcone.
Mark Falcone. And if you want to get in touch with Mark after the phone, you'll see his email and I believe phone number on the screen. And next to Mark is
Tim Twietmeyer.
And Tim says, you know where to find him. He's in the book. So we'll leave it at that. Just before, Tim, you got here, I started talking a little bit with Mark. But before I want to go back into that, you were talking about that John Muir experience. And I know you've had a similar experience regarding that. But before that, I want to start with this quote that I found by John Ruskin, an English writer. The highest reward for a person's toil is not what they get from it, but what they become by it. And I'm going to ask both of you to respond to that quote. Let's start with Mark.
Well,
I can repeat it if you like.
No, I mean, I kind of get that. I mean, it kind of goes to our pre-conversation. You know, I've known Tim now since 2000. We both came from a tech background in HP, and you know, we're ultra runners. You know, this guy is, you know, obviously everybody knows what he is. He's a genetic freak, and
He's inhuman.
yeah, and you know, I'm a back of the packer kind of a guy. But one of the things that we have in common is we love the woods, we love the outside, and you know, I grew up being a Boy Scout. I'm proud to say I was an Eagle Scout, and one of the things I always wanted to do was do the John Muir Trail, hike it. And one day Tim and I were out for a bike ride. This is years ago. I just mentioned, you know, like, John Muir Trail, one of these days I'm going to do it. And he goes, I did that in '99.
Of course,
right.
right.
So for years he's been after me to, like, hey, when are you going to do John Muir? When are you going to do John Muir? And then my wife and I, Tracy, wound up doing it last year. And that quote is perfect. You know, what you mentioned, it's just the epitome, that whole experience and the reward. And and I've done a lot of things in my life, you know, professionally and in sports, especially endurance kind of sports, but there's nothing that could ever, you know, replicate that.
Can you give some specifics?
The things that I really liked and was hard coming back after being on the trail, and Tim chime in, but he could definitely relate to this.
He's smiling. He's got this big smile on his face.
Yeah, I kind of went into, and Tracy did too, went into withdrawals after we were done because, you know, specifically to answer your question, I mean, you get so checked out because you're in this stuff that the 1% of the 1% in the world never see. You know, it's bigger than life. You know, you got rock, you got ice, you got snow, you got water, you have all those sounds associated with that. You're checked out from technology, you know, and I'm a technology guy, right? Which is kind of hard, but after a day or two, you never think about it because you have all this goodness around you, right? And
You mean you could leave that world?
I could leave that world. I can see how people wind up doing hikes like the Pacific Crest Trail. I never can understand being out there from, you know, April to September if it was a good year and, you know, hike that 2,800 miles. I never could understand that, but now I get it, you know, because you kind of get into this thing and it is a goal-oriented thing, like a lot of endurance sports, but it's more than that because you kind of become consumed in the whole experience. So anyway, back to Tim. I mean, when I told him finally that we were going to do it, he was all over that. He's sending me maps and GPS coordinates and places to go. And,
you had all the technical stuff.
Oh yeah, it's just, you know, you know, you look at your life, and that was probably one of the, in terms of things to do, that was probably at the top of the list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tim, that quote, the John Ruskin quote, what would you...
He's got no memory retention, so you have to repeat it.
I'll repeat
Way
it.
back when.
I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it. The highest reward for a person's toil is not what they get for it, but what they become by it.
I think there's a couple of good examples in my life. I mean, part of it is just that, the Western states run as a whole. I mean, I started out in that as just wet behind the ear nobody who didn't know the difference between a 10K and a 10-miler.
Yep.
And read about it. And then, it's been 30 years of my life invested in either running, working the race, watching it, now heavily involved in a lot of the administration and the machine of putting the race on. And it's a great investment to pass on. I was able to take advantage of it for 25 years of running, but now it's time for me to, make a connection to the next round, let the other guys take over. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to make that happen.
So
and
for the last 5 years, you've been...
Yeah, invested in the, the board of directors and helping the race management. And
Well, you've been involved with the
trail
board for 15 years, right? Yeah. And we've been involved jointly in the trail preservation and trail management efforts since 2004. Yeah, but I mean, this guy is like the most modest and humble guy there is, I mean, I think everybody knows his running resume, hopefully that's out there, especially the local folks.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about it today.
But yeah, that trail stuff, it kind of fits into your quote as well. It's, he's got kids and he's got super kids, and that legacy is going to get passed on to those kids, and they're already involved. One of his sons, Austin Twietmeyer, he comes to all the trail events, and he's got the bug of what it takes to manage the trail and that interaction with people when you're out there working a trail event. It's a lot of fun, I mean,
Teamwork.
Yeah.
it's teamwork, but it's teamwork in a way where we have a lot of fun. I mean, it's stuff we can't talk about in this room. It's almost like Howard Stern kind of. We have a lot of stories.
Well, what goes on the trail stays on the trail.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll let Tim talk.
When you think about that, we just got back from a meeting at the Forest Service just, half an hour ago, and had Hal Hall there from the ride, and we were talking about the history of the trail, and it's been, some parts of that trail been here 160 years, and it's generally in the same condition it was back in the mining days, and to be able to carry along that tradition to the next round is really important. So on the run side, but even on the hiking side, going back to John Muir Trail, that was one of the first mega hikes I ever did. I had dabbled in backpacking, lightweight little 1 day, 2 day trips up in Desolation Wilderness, which is like the minor leagues of hiking, right?
The minor leagues?
The minor leagues, yeah, because when you get onto the John Muir Trail, it just keeps getting better and better. And you start down there near Yosemite Valley, you go up through Yosemite, and then you exit out into these other smaller wilderness areas. But the last 100 miles of that, if you enjoy the outdoors and you enjoy trail, I kid Marco, it's like nectar, trail nectar. It's as good as it gets. It's particularly when you get into those high passes, and in one particular point, you get to a halfway point in that hike, and then there's a 12-mile uphill that goes from river level to the top of this pass at 12,000 feet, Muir Pass, and you go through almost every ecosystem and scenery that you can imagine down to the river level, and certain types of trees and soils and animals, and you climb and you go up into these big giant meadows that are just green and miles long. Then you get up above the meadows into like the high mountain lakes, and then there's no more trees, no trees at all, just rock and water and ice and snow. And then you go over this pass and there's this little tiny rock hut on the top, and that's it, and then back down the other side. And it just goes on like that. And when you think about enjoying being outdoors on the trail, it doesn't get much better than that.
So what if there's somebody out there who hasn't done any of this? What would you recommend? Because not everyone has a technical guru to supply you with all the coordinates. So what would?
Well, it's kind of the same approach I took with my wife Tracy, right? Had
what was that?
Well, she had zero experience backpacking, right? Well, a little, but the experiences that she had was pretty negative, right? But we just started doing...
Excuse me, why was it negative before?
Because Well, her ex-husband. I was trying to say more.
So depending upon who you do it with,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Okay. All
So,
right.
yeah,
We'll leave it. We'll leave it
yeah.
at that then.
But you know, we started out really slow, just doing day hikes, and the day hikes that we would do always involved. You know, we started out small, but a moderate climb, and then
Small
to a
means
larger
it
climb.
means climbing.
Yeah, you know, we'd go out there, you know, and do these day hikes that finally got up to 10 or 12 miles with, you know, a couple thousand feet of elevation gain. And from there, we decided, okay, let's start doing overnighters. So we would do an overnighter and, you know, like go up to Carson Pass, you know, off of Highway 88, perfect area to do this kind of stuff. And did that, you know, for a year or two. And then finally, you know, we figured out, hey, the timing's right. We're ready to kind of do something like this.
So you spent at least a year,
We
if
spent
not
a
longer?
couple years.
A couple years.
Getting a base. It's no different than like a person preparing for a marathon, right? You know, obviously that's more rigorous, you know, especially if you have a pretty aggressive goal.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same kind of preparation and planning. You know, Tim and I are a lot alike in that regard. Is, you know, we like to plan things out.
Well, you're technical guys.
We like statistics, and you know, we like the data and all that stuff. So that kind of goes hand in hand with the planning part. But yeah, that's kind of what we did. And you know, plus having a friend like him, you know, it made it that much easier because I could draft off of his own experiences, right, which were all good. You know. Even the ones that he's been stuck like in a storm on the top of a mountain, you know, somewhere with somebody underneath a rock ledge. Again, it's got to stay on the trail. We don't want to name any names here, but yeah, it's you know, proper preparation, right? You know, there's a horse guy, Pat Pirelli. You know, I'm sure you've heard of him.
Yeah, sure.
You know, he's a natural horse guy, a horse whisperer,
Right.
and he always talks about proper preparation. Well, this is again, if you have the proper preparation. And I remember when I first started ultra running 25 years ago, I was running with this gal on my first AR-50, I think it was in '88. And we were talking, and it was just like she did it every year. Like this guy, he's a major streak runner, right? And here I am doing my first one. And I just said, well, what's the secret? And I'll never forget this. She goes, you need to do your homework. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing, you know. So get the base, do your homework, and then you have the epic journey.
That's what's so great about the electronic access now, because I was just looking at a trip not too far off the John Muir Trail, and there's so much information online now that you can pull information about trailheads, campsites, you know, locations, and all that's electronically available, where you used to have to go get a book and, you know, scour through the notes and write them all down.
But you're experienced. So what about somebody new? Would they be able to go online, and would that be helpful?
Yeah,
or would
do exactly what he said. I mean,
there's whole sites just on John Muir Trail.
John Muir, you know, like just say, what some people do is they say, I don't want to do the whole thing. I just want to do like a section at a time.
Okay.
You know, like one of the trails that we have in our local backyard, Tahoe Rim Trail that goes around the lake.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people will just decide, I'm going to do a section at a time until I complete the whole 165 miles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same approach with John Muir. Some people choose to do that route versus doing the whole thing. You know, so, but to answer your question, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of information on the net, like Tim said.
Is that where you'd start?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just put in some basic questions like, okay, I want to do John Muir for the first time. What should I do? Google that.
Okay.
And you'd be shocked. There's tons of stuff out there. I mean, John Muir Trail last year, Tim and I were talking about this on one of our bike rides going into work not too long ago. Outside Magazine last year, I think it was, did a story on the best hiking trails in the world. John Muir Trail was #1.
Wow.
You'd be surprised how many international folks are hiking along with you. You'll run into somebody, and they'll be German, and then there'll be somebody from Italy and somebody from Asia. It's just amazing. But, you know, even for me, I mean, even that John Muir trip was fantastic. I mean, I was just in awe of the trail and the grandeur of the scenery. Marco always talk about after his ride. I don't know, where'd the dinosaurs go? I mean, it's that,
so
it's that, you know, stark compared to our normal everyday life, right? Yeah. But even for me, you know, back to the, you become, from there on, I hiked for like 10 straight years out there. And we're planning a trip for this year. Now my kids are old enough to go with me rather than me leaving them behind. And we did one last year, had a blast. Again, did the research on our own, went off the trail and into some areas that were a little sketchy, but exciting. And that was another one of those things where you kind of open up the lid of the can and there's just so much to find in there, and you just keep exploring. And I almost think now John Muir was, just the beginning, and it's been so much fun now to go and evolve from that, because you get to the point where, like, good, the trail's fun, but there's when you look at what we have in our backyard, Yosemite, Kings Canyon, Sequoia National Parks, some of the best hiking in the world is in those parks.
But you had a running base prior, right?
Yeah.
What about the individual who doesn't have that running base? Mark said him and Tracy about a couple of years. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's good. There's a person that's in our community. Her name's Audrey Veers, and Tim knows
She's
her.
an expert.
She ran Western States in '95. It was one of the years he won. It was probably one of the most brutal Western States.
Yeah,
years.
I know Audrey.
Snow year, really super hot, and Audrey finished that year, and she's turned into this mega hiker, and she's in, I think she's 70.
She's my age.
70.
She's roughly my age.
Yeah, so late
But she
70s.
was doing this packing prior to
Yeah,
hiking.
with a goat or with a
with
mule.
with her husband. Yeah.
Right. No, but she was also.
And the goat.
But my point was that she goes at a relatively slow pace. I think she did John Muir 2 years ago for the first time.
Okay.
She took like 22, 23 days.
Okay.
But that worked for her, right? And she did it solo.
Oh, she did?
Yeah,
That's
so
impressive.
Yeah, so here's this, kind of goes with the theme of your show, right? She'd be great to interview. She's a very interesting lady, but she decided she wanted to do this, and she's in her 70s and decides to do it solo, and just had a magnificent time. Tracy and I just had a slideshow with her recently.
Okay.
And we both exchanged pictures, on the television, watching our pictures and her pictures of John Muir, and then she showed us some other hikes. She's actually gone out to Mount Blanc, where Tim's raced the ultra out there, and she's doing this big loop around Mount Blanc, like a 2-week kind of thing.
Okay.
So, but again, it's just like, the base is one thing, but to get a hiking base, it's just something you need to be consistent with. You need to just kind of start slow.
But consistent means what?
Going up on a weekly basis, at least once a week, and getting some kind of hike in, and then walking around your neighborhood. If you're not a runner or you're not a cyclist, doing walking, in between, maybe a couple times a week.
Being aerobic.
Yeah, you just got to keep it's like Tim. He always has these kind of quirky things that he says over the years, and a lot of them stick with me. Okay, I'm like 56 now, and I was at a local orthopedist in town getting a tune-up the other day, and I'm going to get some injections in my knees, and I started cracking up because I said this one thing to him about he knows Tim really well because his son Matt did an ACL surgery on him. But anyway, tell the story here. So whenever I get up in the morning, this is what Tim always says, and I always say, I've been saying it for 10 years. The first thing I do is reach for the oil can and squeeze out all the joints because I'm so flippin' stiff, and all the wear and tear and all that stuff. But yeah, you got to keep the parts moving, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny though, to back to your John Muir trail, you'd be shocked at how many older folks are hiking that trail. And it's great because they're the most rugged guys out there. You'll see them with one of these.
Older folk is defined as?
70s.
Older than
way older.
We are.
Older than you.
But we see these guys, right? And they've got their old, REI backpack from, external frame from 1971, right? When they were, 23 and, out there and hiking, and you just know they've been out there. They know the trails, and they're rugged as all get out, right? They've been through all the passes. They've been to all the places. You stop and talk to them, and it's a great conversation because most of those guys have been over all the trails. They've been doing that for 30, maybe 40 years. Some of them have brand new equipment, and you kind of go, okay, yeah, there's a lot of equipment involved here, really nice stuff now that you can get that lighten your load and allows you to move a little more fluently. Some of the guys like the old school stuff, the long pants, the long shirts, the sombrero hat and the 1970 external frame pack, and they still kick butt.
Well, it's funny Tim mentions that because we were going over Forester Pass, which is the last pass before you get down to the plateau and then climb Whitney.
Okay.
It's like over 13,000 feet.
That's a hike.
Basically,
That's a hike.
Basically, it's the bridge between Kings Canyon and Sequoia National
Okay.
Park. You're kind of getting out of Kings Canyon, getting into Sequoia. Anyway, there was this guy, and it's funny because I remember we're hiking up Forester Pass, and it's not that it's terribly steep, but you just got these really long switchbacks, and it's bare, and you can see. And we're probably halfway up, and I see this guy way down there. All I could see was this big-ass pack, you know, this really big pack. The guy's just like gaining ground on us, right? And not that that was any big deal, but
Come on, Mark.
then when he got close, I remember saying to Tracy, I go, I swear to God, I go, that guy kind of looks like Frank Lieberman, right? You know,
It's this Frank.
it's this little guy, and the pack is like, it's like what Tim's talking about. It's probably a 25-year-old pack, and the guy catches up to us, right? And we're about 2/3 of the way up, so we still had a third to go. He passes, and I go, how's it going? And the first thing he said, he was really kind of grumpy. He goes, this trail's way too crowded. The first couple times I did this 30 years ago, I was out here by myself. Now there's people all over the place. You know, I'm going, really? I didn't see that. I haven't seen that many people. But anyway, the point was he had this old school, you know, everything old school about him. You know, the Sierra cup. You know what a Sierra cup is? Those metal cups that you clip on your pack.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of funny, but
Yeah.
So the title of this show is about mental toughness.
yeah.
So give me a definition, because you guys fit that.
Well, No, he does. I have.
Well, give me a definition
I have
for
a
him,
lot.
and then I'll ask
I
for
have,
his definition.
sometimes I have some mental toughness, and other times I think I do. And
Well, tell me the times that you do.
well, mental toughness for me is, you know, just in everyday life or just trying to achieve a goal is exactly that. Is mentally focused on that goal and figuring out a way to make it happen.
The focus.
And don't losing sight of that.
The
And,
focus.
yeah.
Okay. So what would be your most difficult goal where you?
Okay, I'll tell you a nutty one.
Okay.
And Tim knows this because when I told him I was going to do this, he goes, I think you're more crazy than I am. I rode from Cool to Huntington Beach, California,
That's
600
a long
miles
way.
on a road bike in 2 days, unsupported.
That's
And
a
I
long
did it in
way.
the heat of summer.
How could you go so fast?
It just, you know, it's
Keep moving.
mental toughness and just keep moving.
What did you have to tell yourself during that 2-day trip to keep going?
All I need to do is get to the next Taco Bell.
Marco would send me a picture. Here I am in front of the Taco Bell and
10 burritos.
That was
having
it?
all.
That was it?
Right. I mean,
was
seriously,
laughing.
it was all about the food. Well, and the other thing that he got me turned on to is, you know, where's the ice cream sandwiches? I gotta find a 7-Eleven so I can get an ice cream sandwich.
Yeah.
So your route then, if we knew the Taco Bells and the ice cream places,
It was pretty off the beaten path, but I made sure that, yeah, there was towns I was going through that were gonna have at least a Taco Bell.
so you would look for the next goal would be something to
Swear to God, it was all related to food and,
all.
well, I mean, because, you know, to be honest, riding through, I rode through kind of the Sierra foothills to start and then dropped down to Stockton and cut across the valley. In the summertime, you just want to get out of that.
It's
We've done that route together.
It's brutal.
When his son was going down to Cal Poly, we've done that route similar route from Auburn, his house, down to Cal Poly. But we did that in the wintertime, you
Okay.
know, and it's a lot nicer. You know, it's green, it's pretty. So you just want to get out of that and kind of get into the Los Padres coastal mountains. Once you get into that, it's epic. I mean, it's like stuff you see in the Alps and you know, in Europe. Really sweeping, switchbacky. They use a lot of these routes on the Tour of California.
Okay.
That part of it gets great because you're climbing and then you get up to the top of the crest and the temperature drops like, you know, 30 degrees and you head out towards the coast, right?
Okay.
But yeah, that kind of stuff for me, it was all about getting to the next goal where there's going to be some food, an ice cream sandwich, a taco, and,
Highway 33.
you know, because I mean, to be honest, to be 16, 18 hours, I think one day I spent almost 18 hours in the saddle, and I knew I was crazy when I got I made a wrong turn. I was on I had a GPS, and my GPS was telling me to go around the LAX airport, International Airport, LAX, and instead of going on the coast, I'm going, well, I know I need to go on the coast, right? So I follow my GPS. Next thing I know, I'm riding my bike into the airport terminal. Like, what the hell? So I got my bike on my shoulder. It's all one way, and I'm skipping over the island so I could get out of there, right, to get on the other side to get myself out. And that was just a cluster. But, you know, stuff like that happens, right? But I still made it.
Makes for a great story.
We'll come back to that. Your definition, Tim, of mental toughness.
When I was competing as a runner, you know, I always, the one thing that I realized that after a few years was it becomes more of a mental competition than it does become a physical competition. There's a certain harmony in running between your metabolism, your physical running, and the mental ability to make yourself go and to make the right decisions on when to do certain things. It took me a while to get that because I got to a certain point where I was a pretty good runner, and it was being able to make that
pretty good runner.
Make that mental leap of saying, you know, how do you get from, you know, from good to, you know, towards the top, and it really became a mental challenge more than it was, you know, get more miles in or, you know, eat more ice cream sandwiches. It was around how do I find that harmony of between physical, mental, and metabolism out on the trail so you feel like everything's in sync, everything's going smooth, everything's going 100%, and when you find that, it's really great. But, you know, there's times where sometimes somebody's got to push you to get there to really feel uncomfortable. You know, there's times when we were talking about it today in the 1995 race at Western States where I was 5 minutes ahead and Trace and the Tarahumara Indians were 5 minutes behind her. And we were going as hard as we could in the absolute most abysmal conditions. You know, it's 105, 106 out, running out on the trail, and, you know, 7 o'clock at night. It's dusty and hot, and you've been going for 14 hours. And you just got to keep going, and you just try not to, you know, think about how hard it is. You just keep trying to
what
find
did you
that.
say to yourself?
You know, there it was just, it was all trying to re-strategize everything as we kept going because it was so hot. We almost couldn't run.
Were you racing Ann and the Indians?
Yeah.
Tell the truth. He wasn't going to get beat by a woman.
Well, it was kind of one of those weird stories where I really
story.
enjoyed running with Ann. She was a great competitor, probably one of the best competitors I ever competed against.
Okay.
Or with, actually, you know, kind of with rather than against. But it was funny because I didn't mind running with Ann. We kind of enjoyed the banter back and forth. She's got a little bit of a kind of abrasive, you know, personality sometimes on the trail, and we kind of get into it a little bit. But I was more interested in making sure I stayed ahead of the Tarahumara guy because he was in my age group and my, you know, my competition, right? And there was a lot of, you know, build up about these guys coming to the race and stuff. So as the more she pulled up on me, the more she was pulling this other guy with her, right? And I got to stay away from Ann so I can stay away from this other person. And so, you know, it went on like that for 8 hours.
But do you remember specifically the things that you kept on saying to yourself?
You know, for me, it was just keep moving at a maximum effort.
Keep moving at a maximum.
You know, there were times where I walked just because I thought it was too hot to keep running. I mean, it was that hot that if you tried to run the whole time, you were going to dehydrate and collapse. And so I'd run for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, and then I'd speed walk for a couple minutes, and I'd run, and I'd speed walk, and try to keep moving. And the story goes that, you know, we were going so hard in the heat, I dropped my pacer, who was running with me, and dropped her pacer, such that we both went through the highway at 7 miles to go by ourselves, and then the pacers came through together into the aid station. The crews were like, hey, what happened to everybody? Well, it was that tough. We were running with flashlights off, you know, trying to just press as hard as we can, but it was, you know, nobody wanted to give in. Nobody wanted to stop and walk. Nobody wanted to. So
was it beating Ann or beating the Indians?
Primarily the third place guy, yeah.
It was really the third.
I thought it would have been a phenomenal time if Ann and I would have finished together one year. Can you imagine that, a 100-mile race with a man and a woman finished together as the winners?
Yep.
Now, would that be on your wins? You've won the states 5 times. Chris Turney wanted me to ask. This is one of Chris Turney's questions. He said, when you're racing, did you have checkpoints where you had to be from maybe aid station, Devil's Thumb to Michigan Bluff? Did you have those times where you had to be there?
I had a pretty good idea how fast I could go in optimal conditions, but every year is different. Every year, you know, it'd be hotter one year, more snow or less snow, or more difficult at the beginning because there was more snow, which makes the middle part harder because you're spending so much effort up high running in the snow. But you know, the one place I always did is when I got to Forest Hill, I always just told myself I only have 7 more hours to go. That was mentally just a milestone for me to say, just keep moving. I know I can make it in if I don't, you know, have any kind of major meltdown. I'd be done in 7 hours. I started counting hours backwards: 7, 6, 5, 4. And then I counted down towards when I knew it got dark, because the whole race changes when it gets dark.
Okay.
So when I got within an hour, hour and a half of the dark, I'd push harder, because I knew that as soon as it got dark, it was going to get slow. Everybody was going to slow down. And so even for people in the back, tell them, hey, when you get close to the darkness, you got to go, because you're going to slow down a couple minutes a mile once it gets dark. You're running by flashlight. Mentally, it's a lot more difficult, because there's so much more effort involved to keep moving at a good rate, that you know, you're better off spending that energy where you can see where you're going than when you're, you know, kind of wandering around in the dark.
So to replenish the energy would be the fast walking.
Yeah.
That would.
Yeah.
So, but prior to Forest Hill, you weren't thinking of time, like,
Yeah,
or miles, or
Well,
what
talk,
you.
talk about what you used to tell me. You know, he used to play this game of, and he was a master at it. Nobody really perfected this, and it was like the game of attrition, right? So he was really good at kind of staying back off the front, right, going into Devil's Thumb.
At the beginning,
I mean, to answer like Chris's question, you know, and Tim and I have spent many times just BSing on bike rides and stuff, or out on the trail running or working on the trail about this, and he was a master at that, where people would just beat themselves up and go 100 miles an hour into the thumb.
At the beginning. Yeah.
And then creeping into Michigan Bluff, he would start to regain control, and then once he got going down out of Forest Hill, you know, people would just start dropping like flies until he took a command of the lead, and he was able to repeat that in every one of his wins. That's how he won them, pretty much, right? Except for maybe the '95 year where it was totally off the
it was just
the charts.
survival.
So
Yeah.
95, you didn't hold back. You were.
Yeah, that was just survival.
Yeah.
That was I always loved when somebody went out fast to kind of beat up all the guys with great leg speed, right? I always kid people, I just outslowed everybody, right? I never really quite was everybody with like tremendous leg speed, but you know, once I got going, I wasn't going to slow down much. But I think, you know, one of the things that I was always thinking about out there was how do you keep your body functioning at an absolutely optimum level as far and as long as you can, right? So hydration, food, you know, not going out too hard such that, you know, when you get to mile 80, you're a walking, bumbling mess, right? And what you find is, you know, later on in the race, there's some really good running stretches where you can really make up some ground if you're feeling good. And if you're not, you know, you're going to get wiped out. And so it was always kind of my strategy to take really, really good care of myself up until more Forest Hill, at which point the running gets really great for 3 hours or so, and be able to then, you know, feel like, wow, I feel like I'm run 50 or 60 miles, but I'm still ready to keep pressing.
So down the California Loop, you have no problem just flying down that?
I love that stretch of trail. Probably my favorite stretch of the whole race, just
Really?
because that was always my strategy of, you know, get to there feeling really good and then just go. As I learned to train for the race, I moved farther back on the course. Everybody used to run like Michigan Bluff out to Swinging Bridge and back, or, you know, Forest Hill. The more I trained, the more I went backwards on the course. And I had this run that went from California Street 2 back to the Swinging Bridge and back, because I always wanted to mentally prepare myself for running really, really well at the beginning of California Street, because it's great running. But you got to feel like you really want to go. You got to go there and feel, I've done this before. I know how to do this. As long as I have, you know, everything ready to go, I'd go. And then, you know, that mental kind of infusion of energy and feeling good 70 miles into the event is, you know, really valuable.
How about you, Mark? What was your approach?
To finish.
That was the goal?
Yeah,
That's a good goal.
Yeah, I mean, with the run or the ride or any of the mountain bike.
Ride, you mean the Tevis Cup?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was always to try to finish, you know, and you know, for me it was, well, you know, my horse at the time that I rode in the Tevis Cup, we had a lot in common, because we were always on the hairy edge whether or not we were going to make it or not. So we had that common bond, right? You know, if it was a good year, we're both feeling good. And it seemed like the years that I rode Tevis with him, that I usually had a decent year at Western States, right? In the same year, which...
That's unusual.
Well, there's not too many people that have done that.
I can't imagine.
It's hard to train for both events. There's been a few people that have done it.
Yeah, Tracy training your horse.
Yeah,
didn't you?
it's just, well, I'd take my horse out there with me on a run. You know?
Where's he
Right.
going?
Yeah, but, right. But, yeah, seriously.
That's not what
though-
she said. She said she trained your horse.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just
I
kidding.
admit it. But,
I'm just kidding.
But yeah, it was really more for me the experience, you know, especially with the run, the experience to finish. And you know, I kind of got a reputation with a lot of friends that Tim and I have that, you know, the years that I've finished the run, you know, and I'm talking like, you know, 26, 28 hour range, you know, nothing to, it's all right, okay time. But I'd have to get my 2-hour nap at Cal Street too, right? You know, I'd come in there, roll it in. I would take like a nap, you know, and that was fine after that. You know, I did that like 3 years in a row. I mean, so total different approach, but it was all about just trying to finish, you know, and experience the event. You know, it's a pretty magical event, pretty magical trail. The organization that puts on the run, it's a pretty amazing management team. You know, 13 trustees that we have are just some of the greatest people I've ever worked with, you know, in my professional career.
Okay, now on this run,
Yeah,
on this run ride, you can't necessarily get a taco.
right.
Maybe an ice cream sandwich.
Milkshake.
You can get a milkshake.
Yeah.
So what did you tell yourself during the run?
You know, my strategy was just to get to the next aid station, right?
That was you tell yourself?
Yeah, just get to the next thing. Get to the next thing. And it was all about getting to the next aid station. I would try not to think about what was ahead, you know.
What do you mean?
Huh?
What do you mean by that?
Well,
Because
the
you know,
finish.
because you know,
Try not to think
you
about
know
the
the
finish.
trail
Because
very
I've
well.
done other 100-mile races, you know, across the country. I've done Vermont. I've done Angeles
Oh,
Crest.
okay, okay.
And you know, it's the same thing. If you start thinking about the finish line, at least with me, that's not a good thing. I just try to play it from aid station to aid station.
It's too far.
Yeah.
The finish
and,
is
you
just
know,
too
once
far
I get that goal, I start thinking about the next one, and then, you know, once you get through 75% and you feel like you're going to get there, okay, then you can start to taste the finish and start to take that all in. But
So in Forest Hill, was that a good place to, or was it after Forest Hill?
again, if Cal Loop, different experience for me than Tim. It's like, for me, it was like, okay, am I going to be able to crawl down this and get down to the river, or am I actually going to be able to run it this year? It's a mixed bag, but I was just taking it aid station to aid station.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think makes him so inhuman with this
Well,
running?
I mean,
with this running
I know
thing?
his parents, and his parents are both in their 80s and relatively really good shape. So I'm not busting his chops, but I mean, genetics definitely plays a role. He's got some good flipping genes. But, you know, he's figured out this mental game probably better than anybody else. Who's had the longevity? You know, I always kind of kid him and his wife, Kathy. I think if Kathy, after 2006, which was his 25th consecutive finish at Western, and most of those in the top 10 are a win, right? A lot of those in the top 5. I always kid Kathy. I go, you know, if you'd let him run every year, he'd be breaking every old man record still. The guy's got longevity like you wouldn't believe. You know, it's just, so part of that's genetics, part of that is his mental toughness, which I have a certain percentage of that. You know, he's got this much, I got this much.
Well, different. It's different for both of you.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, it's. I think that's why we're such good friends, right? Because we have a lot of the same kind of interests, right? And we have the same appreciation for the sports, but in particular with Western States, he's got a view of it. I have a different view of it.
Sure.
And we got this holistic view together, right? Which is kind of a cool thing, you know. It's us to be part of the organization that puts that on.
It's pretty neat, you know.
It's a pretty special thing.
I want to hear about your parents. because
They're cool people.
Because I know with the genetics thing, there's an aspect of that. Plus, not only genetics, but my guess would be the modeling, the behavior of your parents as well.
Boy, I have to come clean here.
You forgot he's a psychiatrist.
You know, we I'd say we grew up in a
Psychologist.
sports
Psychologist,
family.
sorry.
So, when I think about it, my dad played sports, not professionally. His brother was a pretty good baseball player, played in the minor leagues for the White Sox, but, they grew up playing sports. He had 3 older brothers, or 3 younger brothers.
What sports did your father play?
Basketball, baseball, softball. Played fast pitch softball, basketball.
Was he tall too?
No, I'm much taller than he is.
You are? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he had a much taller brother. Maybe that's where I got the tall gene.
Okay.
But, good athlete. My mom never competed. She just bowled once a week. That was her thing.
Was she competitive though?
Yes. Yeah. So it was a league of women. She took her bowling seriously. Yeah. Her weekly bowling was something she took seriously. And then my sisters swam or played softball. My closest sister was a really good runner when I started running. She's the one that got me into running. And so we ran our first couple marathons together. And she doesn't run as much now, but we were around sports all the time, watching sports, playing sports. I lived across the street from a junior high field.
Did you grow up in Auburn?
No, I grew up in the Bay Area.
What part?
Redwood City.
Redwood City. Okay.
Yeah. So when you're into sports and you live across the street from a schoolyard, you spend all of your waking hours, and some of them at night, over there hitting baseballs, golf balls, playing football, shooting baskets.
You're at the school.
You're there from sunup till sundown, and we used to shoot baskets at night. But we were always around sports. But I think probably more than anything.
Were you good in basketball?
No, I was okay. Yeah, I didn't get my height until I was much later, until I was almost out of high school. So I wasn't really.
You're a great golfer, though.
I was pretty good at golf, and that's what's funny is golf is almost a parallel to ultra running. You realize there's a lot of more mental part of golf than what meets the eye.
True.
And there's a lot more mental part, but probably anything that my parents taught me was just work ethic. How to go after something if you really want it. I mean, they were grew up in the city. And this kind of cracks me up as somebody that grew up in the city, and then they moved to the Bay Area after my dad got a job transfer they grew up in Chicago. And so my dad worked, my mom was always home. She was a homemaker.
Okay.
And you just learn. She was up there every day, made breakfast, made lunch, made dinner, everything moved. She ran the house, my dad worked, and you just get used to the focus of get the job done.
So you don't have a brother, you have just sisters.
I have 3 older sisters, right.
So you're the baby.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so tell me the dynamics within the family, being the baby with all these women.
Yeah, well, it's being the only boy was interesting because I'm sure that they did sports as well. Like I say, my sisters are pretty good athletes as well. My sister has one of my sisters has a couple of daughters who are accomplished coaches and softball players.
Okay,
so there's still fairly active athletes in the family, but
you
I was pretty lucky.
You as a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was good. I had much like Mark and I now, I had a next door neighbor who was my best friend, and we played sports all the time. I mean, that's just basically what we did. If there was a sport to play, we were playing it. And we might not necessarily be super great at it, but we just enjoyed the competition. Golf, bowling, baseball, basketball, football, you name it, we were involved in it in some way or another.
So sports is your identity.
Mm-hmm.
From way back when.
Yep.
And for you, Mark, in terms of your parents?
Similar, except my parents grew up in the Bronx in New York City, right? And very much city people. And, my dad was a workaholic engineer. But the one thing that my dad wanted for me was to experience the stuff that he didn't experience as a kid.
Okay.
And he got me involved in tennis really early. I started playing tennis when I was like 6 or 7 years old.
All right.
Played tennis all the way into college, and loved the game. And that's a major. It's just like ultra running, like Tim using an analogy with
What
golf.
sport isn't mental?
That's a major mental sport, And but he also got me involved in scouting, and scouting was.
Did he do sports?
No.
He didn't do sports.
He didn't
Mother
do
didn't do sports
He
either.
was just a workaholic.
Workaholic, okay.
Yeah, my mother was, she was a homemaker and, just a mom, right? I've got a sister.
What do you mean just the mom?
Well, she was a mom.
Come on.
Professional mom.
Come on.
But yeah, he got me into scouts, and that was really kind of my outlet to really experience
Still in the Bronx?
outside.
Still in the Bronx?
Yeah, we were in New York City at the time, and then we moved out here to Southern California, I think when we were about 6 years old. I was 6 years old.
So you did the Scouts out here then, California then?
Started in Cubs out there.
Cubs.
Really early. I think my first year out there, and then scouting out here, and then we
Okay.
were out here ever since. We moved up to Northern California, right? So, but yeah, I mean, without my dad, I wouldn't have had that appreciation for the outdoors through scouting, and wouldn't have had my sports outlet through tennis.
So that was his idea that you you do Scouts?
Yeah, and then my sister's been a recreational runner her whole life. You know, she's done a few marathons.
Just the one sister?
One sister, and then I have a nephew. We were just back in North Carolina. He just graduated from college, and he made it to he was a captain of his basketball team.
All right.
They made it to the NCAA round two years in a row. So, you know, a lot of pride there. You know, big kid. I mean, it's like, I'm sort of tall, but this kid's big. You know, just handsome, fits the part, right? You know, and a lot of pride there. But yeah, just a super athletic kid.
So tell me more about the scouting, because you were talking about that before.
Well, you know, like when Tim was talking about his parents, you know, shaping his life, you know, I always admire what my dad did. You know, he was an aerospace guy, you know, and traveled all over the world. He was working on top secret programs like U-2 and SR-71, which were vital, you know, during the Cold War, you know, spy plane stuff. And I followed in his footsteps. But to answer your question on scouting, you know, I didn't see much of my dad. You know, he was always gone.
The workaholic.
Oh yeah, he was gone. He was wherever they were deploying U-2 or SR-71, he was there. You know, he was one of the guys that was on the ground, you know, working on the aircraft. And
Okay.
But the good thing, like, he got me involved in scouting, and I think that kind of shaped me into the person that I am. You know, my value system.
Tell me about the value system.
Well, you know, you take the Boy Scout creed and, you know, trustworthy and all that stuff. I can't remember all of it, you know, but, you know, it's just, you know, people can say what they want about scouting, but, you know, the founding principles are still alive today. And there's a lot of good people, a lot of good kids that have turned into pretty decent contributors to humanity that are scouts, right?
Oh, sure.
So it is a good recipe for success. And for me, it was, like I said, it shaped me into who I was. I loved it. I even got into, so a lot of people probably are not totally familiar with scouting, Boy Scouts, but you got Cubs, you got Boy Scouts, and then you got Explorers. When I was getting out of scouting, I got into Explorers, and that's when the whole co-ed thing happened, right? And to be honest, that was like weird. You know, there's like girls, or, you know, I mean, it was just weird. You're like 16, 17 years old, the hormones are flaring, you know. Now you get girls in the mix, and it's like, it kind of,
So it's different. It
was different. You know, I did it for a year or two, and I just said, you know, this is not, you know, there were parts of it that were fun, don't get me wrong, but, you know, it was just not the same anymore. But yeah, I wish I could do, I wish I had more free time, because the run takes so much of my time.
More free time.
Well, I know,
Come on.
I'm retired again, but I mean, I wish I had more free time, because I wouldn't mind, you know, being a scoutmaster or something like that at some point.
The teaching.
Yeah, because the best mentor I ever had was my scoutmaster. I remember when I got my Eagle Scout, he gave me this book from the Sierra Club. It was a guide to the Sierras. You know, everything you want to know about the fauna, you know, the flora, the, you know, animals, whatever, you know, it was all there. The geology, it was all there. And I still have that to this day. I mean, you know.
City boy made good.
Yeah, I mean.
It's funny how your parents and my parents both grew up in the city.
Well, yeah, he was born
now we can't get out in the outdoors enough.
Yeah,
be out in the trees and in the dirt.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. I mean,
I'm from Detroit, so I can relate.
And you were born in New York City too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Oh, you in New York City
Long
too?
Island, yeah,
Okay.
Rockville Center. Yeah.
You were about to say something before.
Well, I was saying, you know, it's funny how you get that, because your parents in the city, my parents in the city. I remember when I ran Western States the first time, I think my folks were thinking, what? Why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
You know, of course, they supported the effort once they realized I was all in on that, but then they didn't miss a race. I was there for all 25 finishes of mine, working on the crew.
And why did you do that?
And I just remember the very first time they had to drive to Robinson Flat before the paved road. I mean, here's a couple that grew up in Chicago, rode the subway or the L.
The
You
L.
know, my mom didn't drive a car till she was 30. Didn't get her driver's license till she was 30. And they're driving out Robinson Flat Road on a dirt road.
God, I can see
you know,
that.
for hours. They just thought, you know, they thought they were going to end up in nowhere. And
They were.
yeah.
That's
and they're
funny.
like, oh, they tell that story over and over.
that's a
Like,
good
but
one.
you know, every year they'd come back and crew and
Yeah.
cheer and get to know all the other people on the course, and you know, they realized that was another great 25 years of memories to pack away.
So clear you're a sports guy, but being a sports guy, playing at the schoolhouse, neighborhood, park. So Western States, where did that? You're how old when you
Yeah, I was.
thought about Western States, and why were you thinking of Western States?
It was just really weird because I was going to junior college at the time at Kenyatta College in Redwood City, and
Okay.
I just started running. My sister had got me in, and I'd done a couple of.
So you're still living in
training
the
runs.
Bay Area
Yeah.
then?
And I was reading magazines in the library while I had a break, and I ran into Runner's World because I was, you know, I'm a new runner guy. I need to find out what's going on, right? In the back, there was this ad for a 24-hour run at the track that was just a mile from my house. I was like, 24-hour run? You got to be kidding me. What, do they start there and then they like run up to San Francisco and turn around and come back? And then he goes, no, it's around the track. And I worked right across the street from there at this country club. And so I said, I got to go see this. This is going to be amazing. I got to go see this. And so I worked that day and then walked across the street and watched these guys go around in circles all day and then all night and then part of the next day. And I went home and said, Dad, you got to come see this. You see these guys running all day. And it was just really fascinating. And I actually know a lot of those people now.
What was fascinating about
just,
that?
you know, kind of how matter-of-fact they were. They were all really normal guys, seemed pretty normal anyway. You know, Don Choi was there, who was the mailman from San Francisco, ran well. Elliot Eisenbud, who lives close by here. You know, they just seemed totally undeterred, not worried about the challenge. You just kept going. You know, there wasn't any, you know, whining or, you know, complaining. They just did their laps on an old cinder track, you know, lanterns on two ends just so they could see at night. And I was like, you know, that doesn't really look that bad. I got to give that a try. So the next year when they had the race, that was my kind of initiation into distance, you know, ultra distance running. I thought that was the greatest thing ever, to be on the track with those guys and going around in circles. Wow.
You're kidding.
I'm a cool guy now, right? I get to run around in circles in the dark with everyone else.
That must be the engineer part of you, liking that structure and definition.
Yeah,
Highly defined.
Because then it was right when Western States was starting to get a fair amount of publicity in the different magazines. Like, oh, these guys are running 100 miles in the mountains.
So you knew about Western States
Well, that's
too?
one of the reasons after that run. I mean, that was the reason I went back, because I wanted to get my qualifier for Western States. I went back, said I got to run 50 miles or I can't apply. So I
you
went
had-
and did 50 miles on the track.
So were you running marathons up to that point?
Just starting. Yeah.
So you had no base.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'd been doing things and in decent shape, but not running shape. But then I had to get into running shape. And that's so then when I went away to Chico to go to school, I was there for 2 years. That's when I did. I started doing marathons and, you know, longer runs. And then, you know, as soon as I got out of school, I was like, okay, how do we do this? Oh, there's a couple of 50 milers and got to try those. Jed Smith and American River. And then it just took off from there. And part of it, you know, the draw me, part of it was the challenge, but part of it was the people as well. I mean, the people in the event are just
They're
fun to be
awesome.
around.
They're
You know,
awesome.
you could sit there and talk for hours on the trail about something that you wanted to talk about. So matter of fact, nobody was too worried about their time or how fast they were going. Or,
Friendly people.
yeah. And so I was like, hey, this
It was
looks
pretty
like a good deal.
intimate. It was always kind of the same group of folks too, right? You know,
Yeah,
a lot of the
those
same
days.
people.
81, 80.
What pushed your button for Western States? Or how-
Not dissimilar. I mean, my first job, I grew up in the Bay Area. My first job out of school, I went to work for Westinghouse Electric. And my boss's boss, it was kind of funny, man. So I never forget this story. It's like, I think a second, third day on the job, and my boss comes down and goes, my boss wants to meet you and talk to you. So I go, and he was kind of puzzled by it. So here I am, this kid right out of school. Why the hell does this big guy that's got hundreds of people that work for him wants to talk to this kid? So I went out and talked to him. And he goes, hey, I heard that this is when Kona Ironman was kind of just starting to gain some traction. And he goes, hey, I heard you're training for Kona, and I thought you might be interested in this. He whips out this thing, and it was an application for Western States. I'm like, what's Western States?
Okay.
You know, this is in the early 80s.
Okay.
And And I go, nah, I don't want to work. I don't want to run 100 miles. There's no way, you know. And he goes, well, you're training for Kona, right? And well, I mean, I'm trying to get there. I don't know if I will, right? But that was always in the back of my head. And I kind of wish I would have, in hindsight, I wish I would have started then, you know, to be at the forefront of that.
The training?
Yeah, versus the first year I did States was 94. It was
Okay.
it was almost 12, 13 years later, right? You know, but yeah, he was one of the original guys. Bill Castile, actually.
No, I know that name.
Bill Castile was on the track that Tim was talking about.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, he was a guy that ran into his 70s, but he was like one of the original guys. He was one of the first guys that wound up doing the Grand Slam of ultra running, which was, you know, Vermont 100, Western States. I think Old Dominion, you could do either Old Dominion in Virginia or Vermont, Leadville and Wasatch. You know, but yeah, he was a good mentor, and he always checked after I left Westinghouse. He'd always check in on me to say, "Hey, are you going to do it someday?" I go, "Yeah, I just did American River 50." He goes, "All right, yeah, just yeah." So
Okay. Well, the time has gone by really fast.
yeah, it's fun.
For me. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So, really want to thank you, Mark and Tim, for coming on the show. And next week we have Craig Thornley,
Oh, cool.
Nice.
the new race director for Western States, and I'm sure you have stories about him already.
He's a real rock star. You'll love him. He's awesome. Craig is just awesome. But the greatest thing I think he's just going to bring a whole new thing to the event.
He's got good energy.
Yeah, it's a renaissance. We're in a renaissance anyway with that sport, and Craig is just the perfect guy.
Okay, well, good, good. Is there anything you want to say to your fans out?
I don't have any fans.
And-
Tracy gave me.
Well, to the
That's right.
and you're gonna.
Can I
yeah,
say hi to my dogs?
you can say hi to your dogs because.
No, thank you.
No, really, because this gets also on the social media.
Well, no, if you want to do something fun, go join one of our trail events that Tim and I manage. And the website's ws100.org. You know, so go out there. It'll tell you when we have the trail events and the best time you ever had. You can hear the really colorful, unrated stories if you participate. You know, so all good.
Tim, anything you want to add to the?
I think going back to the beginning, you know, if there's something really big you want to do, the information's out there. You just got to go find it and prepare. That's part of the fun of the thing. Is actually doing it is tremendously rewarding, but the preparation can be as interesting and as fun as actually doing whatever you're going to do. And Marco and I have both said some of the best times we've had out on the trail or out on our bikes is when we weren't competing. We're just doing it because we wanted to be there. And so, you know, find whatever that is you want to go do and go do it.
Yep.
It's the companionship and the friendship, the team.
Well, yeah, I mean,
people.
you know, it's funny because you know everybody has friends, but you know, we have something pretty special. You know?
Keep it.
Hopefully, we take it to
Keep
the
it.
grave.
Well, yeah,
You know,
or beyond, whatever.
yeah,
Okay.
it's all good. All right.
Thanks
Mark.
everybody for watching. So I think we're done.
Cool.
Okay, it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.